Davies' 2004 book, Small Island, was chosen by The Guardian as one of the most significant books of its decade. So the structure of the novel is also really important to its message. The fact that we have these four strong voices. We have Hortense and Gilbert Joseph, who come to Britain from Jamaica, and we have Queenie and Bernard Bligh, Londoners, Bernard going off to Burma for the war. And it's really important that we hear from all of them directly. And that style of narration is sometimes called multivocality, and it's linked with an author seeking to show how there is no one dominant or single version of history, but we need to see the difference of perspectives alongside each other. Inevitably, within this novel, these lives become entwined, very intimately entwined in terms of finally sharing a life, but also entwined by the historical forces that are changing the relationships between the sexes, between young and old, between different ethnic communities as Britain becomes a post-colonial nation. One of the other aspects of Small Island that's very important is it doesn't only narrate the history of how the host population treated the migrant population. So not just what the British thought of Jamaicans, but really importantly, what Jamaicans thought of the British. And it does so against the grain of expectation. So there's a lovely moment in the book when Hortense goes out on a shopping trip with Queenie to buy a loaf of bread.
The man enclosed his big hand over the loaf, his freckled fingers spreading across it. I stared on him. Was I to eat this bread now the man had touched it up? With his other hand he wiped his nose, and he held out the bread for me to take. I did not take it, for I was waiting on him to place the bread into a bag to wrap it. There you are, he said to me, pushing the loaf forward, enough for me to see a thin black line of dirt arching under each fingernail. It was Mrs. Bligh who came and took the bread from him. Her dirty hand having pinched up my loaf as well, she placed it into my shopping bag. Then she tell me loud for all to hear, this is bread. She'd think me a fool that does not know what is bread. But my mind could not believe what my eye had seen, that English people would buy their bread in this way.
I think this little moment in the text shows a couple of things. The first is that Queenie is wanting to teach Hortense about England. We already know that Queenie is very open-minded. She's allowed West Indian lodgers in her house when her racist neighbours have tried to undermine her. But what she doesn't understand, and what this extract shows, is she doesn't understand how much culturally her and Hortense already share because of colonialism. So she thinks she's here to educate Hortense, and there's that kind of idea that somehow the colonies must be less advanced, less knowledgeable. And the opposite here is true. Of course, Hortense is, more educated and more culturally aware and diverse than Queenie is. And just in that one moment, we see a real reversal of ideas of kind of cultural stereotype. What's important is that Hortense is a character around whom so much ambition is constructed and so much promise. We really have a sense in which she has so much to bring, she has so much to give, she has a lot of learning, she has a lot of potential as a young woman who thinks she has her whole life ahead of her. And the novel just gradually shows how she has to reconsider that, reflect on that, and find a space that's much smaller than the one she could have occupied. So by the end of the novel, when she talks to Gilbert after her rejection from the teaching interview, and he says to her, "Do you know how to sew?" And we begin to see that this kind of downscaling of her contribution, the contribution that she really could have made to British society, which is another kind of untold part of the migrant story, not just not telling the massive contribution that this population group made to Britain, but also the contribution that was lost because they weren't allowed to really express and find their proper place. So Small Island doesn't just give us the lives of West Indian migrants, it also shows us how lives were changing for everybody during this period. And the life of a seemingly unremarkable Queenie Bligh is one of our four main characters. Her life takes several very unexpected turns when she decides to rent rooms to West Indian ex-servicemen. It's quite a brave move. She rejects the scorn and interference of her neighbours, and she forms attachments to these men, not just as landlady, but as friend and as lover. When her husband Bernard finally comes home from the war, just a few days later, Queenie gives birth to a mixed-race child, Michael. This is the child of another RAF serviceman, Michael Roberts, with whom Queenie had a brief and very passionate affair. And it's a really, really important moment in the novel, because despite her evident love and attachment to her child, who she also names Michael, Queenie decides that she cannot keep this child, that she must find a way of placing him with a black family. Bernard has not just come home, but he's repossessed his home in a very patriarchal way and seeks to expel the black tenants in it. So she recognises that the space for a multicultural environment which she had sought to create is no longer possible. And in a slightly unexpected moment in the novel, when you read it for the first time, Queenie actually asks Hortense and Gilbert to take Michael and bring him up as their own baby. If I gave him to an orphanage, I carried on, I'd never know about him. Never. And he would never know how much I loved him, and how all I wanted was to be a good mother to him. They were just staring at me. I must have looked. No, I was pathetic. You might let me know how he was getting on. You might write to me and tell me. I know it's a lot to ask. I just want him to be with people who'll understand. Can't you see, his own kind? But I'll do it any way you want to. Any way. But you have to say you'll take him. Michael started to cry. I pressed both my hands together. You know I'm begging, but it's not for my sake. Honest to God, it's not for me. I know you could give him a better life than I ever could. Don't do it for me. Please do it for him. So when Queenie goes down on her knees, obviously she overturns those expectations around social power. But actually, she confirms her belief in a way in race relations and denies that possibility of bringing up a mixed race child in a family with a white mother. And I find it quite a sad moment in the novel, because I think despite her earlier defiance against racism in taking in these men into her home and recognising the fullness of their humanity, she actually allows that idea of race to separate her from her own child. And there is a way of reading that ending as a kind of utopian notion of how post-colonial Britain has entwined the lives of these people so much that, a child could be passed from one family to another. That the cultural exchange of empire allows this kind of extended family. But it seems to me that all of the encounters of the book are charged with that gross history of inequality, and that actually even people who don't believe in race are damaged by it. I think what's so compelling about Small Island, and what really does make it so significant, is that no one story can tell us the complicated whole of Britain's coming of age as a post-colonial society. But by writing these four distinct and differently positioned voices and bringing them to life alongside each other, Small Island shows what that official history often does obscure, that empire shaped the lives of the whole nation and not just the lives of Britain's black community.